if you're in the right place, you almost never ask yourself, why did I do this? I am a physician, a surgeon. At the moment, I am actually based in Germany, in Tübingen. I'm obviously not German, but I'm sitting in Germany. That is mainly because my daughter is here, which means that I have to share my time between my work, my school, my daughter, and she's in the first position. And having had these two sort of latent interests, not only the clinical and medical side, but also the technology side. The technology side was what made me ready to be curious about the subject matter that I studied at the University of Nicosia. Well, I did the program, the Master in Digital Currency at the University of Nicosia. And that has its genesis in this new sort of area of digital currencies, blockchains, which was all triggered by the introduction of Bitcoin in 2008, 2009. In those early days, there was really no one to talk to about this subject. And I had to inform myself mainly with whatever I could find on the internet. One of the administrators from the University of Nicosia had announced that they were, I believe, joining an initiative in Cyprus to bring about, digital currencies and blockchain as a focus for future economic development in Cyprus. And at the same time, they announced that they were accepting Bitcoin for tuition fees and that they were developing a master's program in digital currency. There was this desire to find other people to talk to and actually try to place this new technology into a broader sort of understanding of how the world works today. The work that I do, how I keep myself busy during the day, I usually want it to have some relevance overall. I am the lead for information exploitation at the Center for Personalized Medicine at the University of Tübingen. And what we are trying to do is we're trying to aggregate all of the vast amounts of clinical and medical information that we have about treating patients and diseases that we see here at the University of Tübingen. And then we try to exploit it in a prognostic or predictive way, such that in the future, when we see a patient with a particular ailment, we'll be able to actually search for patients that have a similar profile and which patients have actually responded well to which treatments and which patients have failed treatments with those other treatments. And in a very prognostic way, be able to zero in very quickly on the most likely successful treatment for this particular patient, hopefully avoiding all of the experiments that we used to have to do. And that's what we're trying to implement here. You always look for something where what you do has some relevance, the new opportunity to think about different things that I gained from my studies at the University of Nicosia, tied in just a little bit to make this possible now. So, first of all, I want to say thank you to the organizers of everything here at this conference. I'm actually really, truly overwhelmed by all the people that are here, the caliber of the discussions that we've been able to have over the last 2 days. And I think we really should congratulate the organizers and the University of Nicosia for actually getting this done and putting this together. So I don't know if there's anybody here who can actually correct my spelling, but the title of my talk is from Hippocrates to Nakamoto, Satoshi Nakamoto. And this is actually really sort of a way that I can try to actually bring you along the journey that I had to try to understand what blockchains are about and what the relevance is. There are actually 3 key things that I want to bring about and leave you with. The first
is sort of my understanding of what a blockchain is. The second thing is I want to make sure that I bring about the idea that health information is actually, at least the way I consider it, I want to suggest that it is actually also an asset, just like any other. Um, and, um, and then the final thing that I actually really want to bring about is a description of sort of the challenges that we have in the area of medicine and personalized medicine and the area of the delivery of healthcare to large populations right now. So I actually, like I said, locally work at the University of Tübingen. I sit behind a computer. I go to school at the same time. It is a 600-year-old university that has a great motivation to evolve and to change, but they think about change in a very sort of incremental way. On the other side, remotely, I work over at at Blockchain Health, and there, you can imagine, it's a small San Francisco company with a lot of very idealistic people, only 5 of us. However, we don't think in incremental ways, but we really try to actually think in disruptive ways. So, as I was going through a lot of this thinking over the last few years, it's actually nice to see what the press is kind of reporting, and what you're seeing right now is that a lot of the decision makers and the participants that are thinking about trying to implement blockchains in some way in their working or in their business operations and environments, what's striking is their view of it actually really depends on where they are, what their particular perspective is. So whenever you look at, for example, payers who are part of the healthcare system, they have a much more financial and insurance kind of view of things, and there naturally is a lot more optimism. There has been a lot more work done in the financial and the insurance area for blockchains. On the other side, you have the providers of medicine, the healthcare providers, and I have to say that they have a view that is much more similar to the 600-year-old university that thinks much more incrementally. And their big challenge is that they operate very complex systems. They are currently working. They break very easily. They have an awful lot of cost as far as actually executing transformations. And of course, they're a little bit more reluctant, and they want to be much more deliberate about what they do. So this slide is actually, in a nutshell, the entire outline of my talk, okay? I think anybody that actually is interested in blockchains and what it will do to our economies must realize somewhere that this idea of collaborating through data is an idea that has a very powerful impact on the future. So this book by Jeremy Rifkin over at the University of Pennsylvania actually brings those ideas up. Those are one of the main takeaways from this book. And what I want to say here is that he discusses this idea of a collaborative commons. Very often what we think about casually is crowdsourcing information, crowdsourcing work, crowdsourcing whatever we want. It's usually, I need something, I go get something. But what we're talking about with a collaborative commons is really collaborative contribution, collaborative sourcing, and also, on the other side, collaborative consumption of this common good. So in this book, he really talks about it in the form, or as it is relevant to the economy at large. And what I wanted to show with some of these other sort of snippets is, at the very top, you see the title of an article that comes from, I think it was Nature, the journal Nature. Relevant in science, relevant in medicine, relevant in biology, and all of these very important trends that are coming into the future. And just, I think it was in the last 2 years or the last year, you see that the same kind of themes are appearing in the healthcare space, in the areas that are going to be very important in personalized medicine. On the right, you see, before I say that, really healthcare, I have to emphasize, we have all of the same problems that the general economy has at large. We are very much a microcosm of the economy at large. And many of the solutions that we work on for very specific verticals outside of healthcare will have an analogous solution inside of healthcare as well. So we're not all that different. The second thing is data. Everybody talks about data right now. With data, I want to say it's actually becoming also incredibly important in medicine because we are relying on data more and more, not just that we're generating an awful lot, but we're relying on it not only for the diagnostic side of what we do, but also for the therapeutic side of what we do. And this is becoming increasingly important, will continue to become important, almost with an impact probably more important than it is in other areas. And I think the most important paper that has come out that I have seen in the last, let's say, 6 months has been this paper here at the bottom. And this is not a blockchain paper, okay? This is a set of researchers out of the University of Stanford University in California. And they have built essentially a cryptographic application, not using full-on homomorphic encryption, however, but using another sort of scheme, secure multi-party computation, which very importantly lets you reveal what you want to selectively to somebody that may be interested. Having said that, it's not a blockchain paper, but what really is quite curious about this is this comes out of a lab where they do an awful lot of blockchain thinking and cryptocurrency thinking. And this intersection I find actually very important, and we'll touch on that a little bit later. So everybody has to have a definition of blockchains, and I'm going to leave this up for as long as I can. So I have fairly strict definitions of what blockchains are. And let me just read this slide very slowly. So it's a ledger implemented as a replicated state machine, technical. But in real world and what this means for me is that it is a communications channel implemented as a peer-to-peer database. It's simply a way of storing data, not requiring an intermediary for consensus. So all of the peers are able to stay in sync no matter what. And the important 3 words in boldface, which allow multiple entities with diverse economic interests to collaborate where it is natural for them to cheat or seek advantage. So that's a mouthful. That's kind of how I think about blockchains. I try to make it as less as not technical as possible. However, within that, what you find are the 3 things that I think that should guide you to those particular situations that may offer a potential use case for blockchains. So you're talking about multiple entities, you're talking about diverse economic interests from those entities, and where it is actually very useful and beneficial to collaborate through data, and there are benefits to be gained from that. So if you don't have any of those, for me, it's really difficult to start saying that we need to do a blockchain. So this is my very strict, unrealistic test for what a blockchain is, in that any message, transaction, or record which is committed to that chain or to that database must be able to be convincingly self-verified by whoever is given that record. So that's my idealistic view. It is very strict. There are very few that would actually satisfy that. However, I have to return to the real world. Before I do that, I want to say that what I mean by self-verifiable, let's unpack that because this is actually really quite important. For any single record in that database, I need to actually know who the author is, the content, the state before and after that record was committed, and that the record that I am presented with is complete without any alteration, without any addition, and without any omission. Okay. The other thing that's actually comes just because we're all talking about a common communications channel, a common ledger, is that everyone has the same copy of it. We're certain that it is, and therefore it becomes highly auditable by anyone. And the other thing is that there's very little need for reconciliation at an interval level. At the end of the month, at the end of the day, at the end of the hour, all of that reconciliation work, which is really expensive for everything that we do in this world, goes away. So what was Satoshi's real gift? So Satoshi actually created a database management system that allowed him to build a cryptographic application on top of it that resulted in the first successful attempt at a digital currency that we've been trying to do for the last 1 to 2 decades that we've never been able to do before. That's what he did. So, in other words, he has given every participating entity on that network or on that protocol the ability to retain full custody and to retain complete autonomy over that particular asset, that financial asset, that cryptographic asset that we talk about. For example, Bitcoin, Litecoin, et cetera, et cetera. So back to healthcare then. Remember I said at the very beginning that every health information I kind of think as an information asset. And whenever you just sort of do the mental gymnastics to think about it, this should provide us with some good fertilizer for us to imagine what we actually could do in the healthcare space in blockchains, with blockchains. So there are several capabilities that I find that anything that related to a blockchain should be able to deliver, all right? So everything between my strict definition is a blockchain to a relational database down below. In between, I call those sophisticated ledgers. And they provide 4 key capabilities as far as I'm concerned. They provide addressing based on the huge cryptographic key space that you have. And that's really useful for unique identifiers, whether you need to identify a person, whether you need to identify one pill manufactured in China and swallowed by somebody in New York. So that's really an enormous capability, and that I won't say too much about it, but it can be managed, or it can be completely unmanaged like we have in Bitcoin. Access control, permission control. And we've been living with usernames and passwords and keys to doors for a very long time, and we've proven that they are imperfect. What we really can do with the things that we've learned from blockchains is that we can replace this old paradigm with arbitrary cryptographic challenges. So it's not the same question that you answer every single time, but I know that it was you that actually answered that question. And the other thing is, with arbitrary cryptographic proofs and some of the stuff I was talking about from that important paper, you may be able to selectively reveal the things that are important to exactly who you want to reveal them. And you are not forced to reveal everything. The other thing, digital scarcity, we know what that is. It's transferable, and it has a built-in accounting system based on that database. And the hardest thing to actually deliver is this digital immutability, which we've never had before, but is actually, I think, the most, stunning for me accomplishment that blockchains could actually deliver. So producing or delivering one of these things or more of these things is what I consider in this space or in this category of sophisticated ledgers. So switch again. So there's an enormous push to transform medicine, digital health in Europe and around the world, in the United States as well. And increasingly, patients are being told, and remember the information asset, that, hey, please don't keep your data for yourself. But we have to do this in a way where everyone benefits from it and no one is harmed by it. And this is a rich area for exploration and thought about where blockchains can actually help in healthcare and in personalized medicine. So as you can see, this is a common sort of phrase that you use in the transplant world about don't take your organs with you because somebody else can actually benefit from a transplant. And I think the same kind of thinking goes on in this data area. So notice the reference to Ferris Bueller's Days Off. Has anybody seen Ferris Bueller's Days Off? Very good. So can anybody tell me what this is? Time's running out. Okay. So this is a stethoscope. Just over 200 years ago, this was invented in Paris. Okay. And this was actually very important. And this will be tied directly into what we're doing with data today. But this particular instrument, this hollow piece of wood, along with the microscope and several other tools that were developed, over the last few hundred years, have actually transformed medicine. And in what way? It has actually taken what was essentially a disease, fever. It has allowed us to look deeply into the patient, and that more precise information has allowed us to take fever and turn it into other diagnoses. So this was very, very important. So instead of having just fever, you may have peritonitis, you may have myocarditis, and all of those require different treatments. The exact same transformation is happening, but also on a little bit of a higher scale at the moment. So going back to Hippocrates, and we've lived by this way for many years, it was always important to know exactly what was going on in the patient, who that patient was, looking more and more deeply into the patient. That is changing today. So, but before I go to the change, what I will say is that we're looking even more deeply into the patient today. So from every single cell in your body, I can collect approximately 3 gigabytes of information, and that's an enormous amount of information that helps us to more precisely understand the patient and even that particular patient's disease. On the other side, we are spending an awful lot of time exploiting the information that we have from at the population level, trying to understand more about how this particular disease behaves and what it means for the patient. So this is where I say collaborating through data in medicine is now becoming an issue. Okay, so I have an enormous amount of information. That information in its entirety is essentially a fingerprint of that patient. It doesn't matter that I may not know the name, but I will be able to identify the patient later, which has an enormous amount of implications. What we need to do today is take that enormous amount of information on any one particular patient and contribute it to the larger pool of data, and while that the patients continue to retain autonomy and custody over their information and are still in the driver's seat. And this is also becoming increasingly important because now, just like we had before, we had one disease. We're finding that colon cancer is not one disease, for example, but it is a spectrum of diseases, and there are a spectrum of appropriate treatments for it. So this is kind of what we're dealing with today. These are our challenges. And the policymakers at the moment are actually becoming more and more vocal about what we need to do, how we need to treat that data, and what position we need to put the patients in to make sure that they are not held in a paternalistic relationship anymore. So this is what makes blockchains actually really quite interesting. So on the other side, we need to really make sure that we get this right, because if we don't, we will potentially put people at harm. Again, referencing Hippocrates, we should never do harm. But I must add that the data that any individual actually donates must serve that individual, and it must never actually harm that individual. Yeah. So, like I said before, we have retaining our custody over autonomy over the donated data, and that's one of the key things that I think we'll be able to do. And it is actually very hard to actually get this right. In San Francisco, we're 5 people. We think about this kind of all the time, and the most important thing is we spend an awful lot of time in trying to deliver those deliverables without reintroducing ourselves as a trusted third party. And I can tell you that that is not easy, and that is what we really try to do. So I want to apologize for going over a few minutes, but thank you, and this is how you can get a hold of me, and that's about it.